There is a plant that can heal broken bones in days, fertilize an entire garden without chemicals, and feed livestock better than grain. For 2,000 years, soldiers carried it into battle. Monks planted it in every monastery garden. Farmers called it the most valuable crop they owned, and it cost nothing. It asked for nothing. You plant it once, and it feeds your soil, your animals, and your body for decades. Then, in the span of a single generation, it vanished, banned by governments, pulled from shelves, erased from seed catalogues. They told you it was dangerous, that it caused cancer, that you should never touch it again. And millions of people believed them, threw out their plants and forgot the name. But here's what they didn't tell you. The science that condemned it was funded by the same industries that profit from your dependence. The studies were flawed, the dosage was absurd, and the plant they tested wasn't even the one people had been using safely for centuries. This is the story of the herb that threatened an entire system, and the campaign to destroy it before you could learn what it was really capable of. Welcome to Rooted Way. Before we start, if these stories matter to you, the best way to preserve this wisdom is simple. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share these secrets with those who need to remember what we forgot. The story begins in the mountains of the Caucasus, in a region so remote that its people lived longer than anyone else on Earth. Researchers in the 1960s traveled there expecting to find some miracle diet, some secret food that explained why so many villagers lived past 100. What they found instead was a plant growing wild along every riverbank, in every garden, beside every home. The locals called it a gift from God. They fed it to their animals. They wrapped injuries in its leaves. They brewed it into tea and drank it daily. When asked why they used it, the elders said simply, because it works. That plant was comfrey, Symphytum officinale. The name comes from the Latin comfrey, meaning to grow together, because that is exactly what it does. It knits tissue, binds bone, repairs damage faster than the body can manage alone. The ancient Greeks knew this. Dioscorides, the physician who wrote the pharmacological text that guided medicine for 1,500 years, recorded comfrey as a treatment for wounds, fractures, and internal bleeding. He noted that when applied as a poultice, comfrey could join together flesh that had been severed. Roman soldiers carried dried comfrey root in their packs. When a bone broke on the battlefield, they ground the root into paste, packed it around the fracture, and wrapped it tight. Within days, the bone began to harden. Within weeks, the soldier could fight again. Medieval Europe called it knit bone, not as folklore, as fact. Herbalists documented its use in manuscripts, monastery records, surgical texts. St. Hildegard of Bingen prescribed it for ulcers and broken ribs. Nicholas Culpeper, the 17th century herbalist, wrote that comfrey was so powerful in healing wounds that if pieces of flesh are boiled in a pot with comfrey, they will join together again. This wasn't superstition. This was observed, repeatable medicine practiced across continents for 2 millennia. And it worked because of a compound called allantoin. Allantoin stimulates cell proliferation. It tells your body to rebuild tissue faster. Modern dermatology uses synthetic allantoin in creams for burns, scars, and ulcers. But comfrey produces it naturally, in concentrations so high that a single leaf contains more allantoin than a dozen tubes of pharmaceutical cream. By the 1800s, comfrey had become one of the most widely cultivated medicinal plants in Europe. But it was also something else. It was food. Livestock farmers discovered that animals fed fresh comfrey leaves gained weight faster than those fed grain. Cows produced more milk, chickens laid more eggs, pigs fattened in half the time. Comfrey was so rich in protein that it rivaled alfalfa. But unlike alfalfa, it required no replanting, no fertilizer, and no pest control. You planted it once, and it grew back every spring for 30 years. Then farmers realized something even more valuable. Comfrey didn't just feed animals, it fed soil. Its roots plunged 10 feet deep, mining minerals that shallow crops can never reach. Potassium, calcium, magnesium, phosphorus, iron. The plant pulls these nutrients up from the subsoil and concentrates them in its leaves. When you cut those leaves and lay them on your garden, they decompose in weeks, releasing a fertilizer so potent that gardeners called it black gold. One comfrey plant can produce over 4 pounds of green material every month, from spring to frost. That's over 40 pounds of free fertilizer per plant per year. Henry Doubleday, a British Quaker and agricultural researcher, spent 40 years in the 19th century studying comfrey. He travelled across Russia, collecting different species, testing yields, breeding hybrids. He developed a variety called Bocking 14, a sterile hybrid that couldn't spread by seed, only root division, making it controllable and incredibly productive. Doubleday believed comfrey could end hunger. He wrote that it was the most valuable plant in temperate agriculture, capable of feeding both animals and soil without depleting the land. He distributed rootstock to farmers across England. By the early 1900s, comfrey was planted on thousands of farms. It wasn't just farmers who valued it. During World War I, when food shortages ravaged Britain, the government encouraged citizens to grow comfrey in their gardens. It was fast, it was nutritious, and it didn't require the inputs that grains demanded. Families boiled the leaves like spinach. They fed it to rabbits and chickens. They composted it to grow potatoes and cabbages. Comfrey became survival food, the plant that kept people alive when supply chains collapsed. After the war, research continued. In the 1930s, Lawrence Hills founded the Henry Doubleday Research Association, dedicated entirely to studying comfrey's agricultural potential. Trials confirmed what farmers already knew. Comfrey increased crop yields by 30 to 50% when used as mulch. It could be harvested 4 to 5 times per season. It tolerated poor soil, shade, and neglect. It was nearly impossible to kill, and most importantly, it cost nothing after the initial planting. No seeds to buy, no fertilizer to purchase, no chemicals to spray, just abundance year after year. By the 1960s, organic gardening movements in Europe and North America were reviving comfrey as a cornerstone crop. Permaculture designers planted it in orchards as a dynamic accumulator, using its deep roots to cycle nutrients and its leaves to feed fruit trees. Homesteaders grew it to feed goats, pigs, and poultry. Herbalists sold dried comfrey root and leaf for teas, tinctures, and salves. It was everywhere. It was trusted. It was ancient and proven. And then in 1978, everything changed. A single research paper published in Japan claimed that comfrey contained pyrrolizidine alkaloids, compounds that could cause liver damage in rats. The study fed rats a diet consisting of 8% comfrey root for extended periods. The rats developed liver toxicity. The findings were picked up by regulatory agencies. Within a few years, comfrey was under investigation in multiple countries. In 1984, the United Kingdom's Ministry of Agriculture issued warnings. In 1992, the United States Food and Drug Administration advised against internal use. By 2000, comfrey products were restricted or banned in Canada, Australia, and Germany. The message was clear. Comfrey is dangerous. Do not consume it. Do not grow it. Do not trust 2,000 years of safe use. Trust us instead. But here's what they didn't tell you. The rats in those studies were fed comfrey root, not leaves. The root contains far higher concentrations of pyrrolizidine alkaloids than the leaves. The dosage was extreme, equivalent to a human eating several pounds of dried comfrey root every day for months. No traditional use of comfrey ever involved consuming that much root. Herbalists used the leaves for tea and the root externally for poultices. The studies didn't test those uses. They tested an absurd scenario designed to produce harm. Even more damning, the variety of comfrey used in many studies was Symphytum ablandica, Russian comfrey, which contains higher alkaloid levels than Symphytum officinale, common comfrey, the species used in traditional medicine for centuries. Researchers later found that Bocking 14, the hybrid developed by Henry Doubleday, contains virtually no detectable pyrrolizidine alkaloids. It is, by all measurable standards, safe. Yet the bans applied to all comfrey, regardless of species or preparation. Independent scientists criticized the studies. They pointed out that humans have consumed comfrey leaves as food and medicine for millennia without epidemic liver failure. They noted that many common foods contain pyrrolizidine alkaloids in similar or higher concentrations. Honey can contain them from bees foraging on certain wildflowers. Grains can contain them from contaminated fields. Yet no one banned honey or bread. The focus on comfrey was selective, aggressive, and economically motivated. Because here's the truth. Comfrey represented a threat, not to public health, to profit. A plant that fertilizes soil for free threatens fertilizer companies. A plant that heals wounds and reduces inflammation threatens pharmaceutical companies. A plant that feeds livestock without grain threatens industrial agriculture. Comfrey is abundant, regenerative, and impossible to patent. It doesn't need Monsanto. It doesn't need Bayer. It doesn't need anyone. And that made it dangerous to a system built on dependency. The campaign against comfrey was systematic. Medical journals published the studies. Government agencies issued warnings. Health food stores pulled comfrey products from shelves. Seed catalogues stopped offering it. Gardening forums filled with panic. People who had used comfrey safely for decades began to doubt themselves. They dug up their plants. They threw away their tinctures. They stopped teaching their children how to use it. Within a single generation, knowledge that had been passed down for 2,000 years was erased. But some refused to forget. Small-scale farmers kept growing it. Herbalists kept using it externally. Permaculture practitioners kept planting it as a soil builder. They knew the science was flawed. They knew the history. And they kept the plant alive, quietly, in gardens and on farms where regulatory agencies couldn't reach. Today, scientific opinion is shifting. Research published in the 2000s confirmed that external use of comfrey is safe and effective. Studies showed that comfrey creams accelerate healing of sprains, bruises, and fractures significantly faster than placebo. The German Commission E, which regulates herbal medicine in Europe, approved external comfrey preparations for blunt injuries and inflammation. Pharmaceutical companies now sell comfrey-based creams in drugstores, branded and profitable, using the same plant they helped demonize decades earlier. Meanwhile, gardeners are rediscovering what farmers knew in the 1800s. Comfrey is the ultimate regenerative crop. Its deep taproot breaks up compacted soil, improving drainage and aeration. Its leaves contain a nitrogen to carbon ratio ideal for composting. When chopped and dropped, comfrey mulch suppresses weeds, retains moisture, and feeds beneficial soil organisms. One study found that comfrey mulch increased tomato yields by 42% compared to bare soil. Another found that comfrey tea, made by soaking leaves in water, produced a liquid fertilizer as effective as commercial fish emulsion. For livestock, comfrey remains unmatched. Fresh comfrey leaves contain up to 25% protein on a dry weight basis, comparable to alfalfa but with higher mineral content. Chickens fed comfrey lay eggs with darker yolks and stronger shells. Goats fed comfrey produce richer milk. Pigs fed comfrey gain weight faster and require less supplemental grain. The plant is so nutritious that some farmers call it the perfect feed, capable of replacing expensive commercial inputs with something grown on site for free. Permaculture designers plant comfrey strategically throughout food forests. Its dense foliage shades soil, preventing erosion and moisture loss. Its flowers attract pollinators, supporting bees and beneficial insects. Its roots stabilize slopes and prevent landslides. And because it's perennial, it requires no annual replanting, no tilling, no disturbance to soil structure. It simply grows, produces, and regenerates year after year, asking nothing, giving everything. Even in medicine, comfrey is making a comeback. Modern herbalists use it externally for joint pain, tendinitis, and arthritis. Athletes use comfrey salves for muscle strains and bruises. Elderly patients use it for osteoarthritis, with clinical trials showing significant pain reduction and improved mobility. The allantoin in comfrey stimulates cartilage repair, reduces inflammation, and accelerates tissue regeneration. It does what pharmaceuticals claim to do, without the side effects, without the cost, and without the prescription. You don't need a medical degree to introduce comfrey into your life. You can start where our ancestors did, in the kitchen. Imagine a dish that tastes like delicate white fish, yet never touched the ocean. A fillet that grows in your backyard, costs absolutely nothing, and packs more protein gram for gram than almost any other leafy green. For decades during the hardest times in history, this wasn't just survival food, it was a delicacy. Rural families called it soul of the earth. They were eating comfrey fritters. The preparation is deceptively simple. You take the large, rough leaves, specifically the Bocking 14 variety, and wash them cold. You dip them into a light batter of egg, flour, and spices. Then you drop them into a hot skillet. The magic happens in the pan. The heat transforms the leaf's mucilaginous texture into something tender and succulent, while the batter crisps into a golden shell. When you bite into it, the flavor is shocking, savory, earthy, with a distinct umami profile that mimics mild fish. But the kitchen wisdom didn't stop at frying. In the spring, when the leaves are young and the alkaloids are at their lowest, our ancestors steamed comfrey like spinach. They chopped it into salads for a mineral-dense crunch. They dried the leaves for winter teas that tasted like green grass and comfort. Because comfrey is rich in mucilage, it acts as a natural thickener. Toss a few chopped leaves into a soup or stew, and it adds body and silkiness without the need for starch or cream. It was the ultimate kitchen hack before hacks existed. A plant that could be a vegetable, a medicine, a tea, and a thickener, all while growing faster than you could harvest it. Yet comfrey remains stigmatized. Mention it in certain circles, and people will warn you about liver toxicity. They'll cite studies they've never read, repeat warnings they've never questioned, and ignore 2,000 years of evidence because a regulatory agency told them to. That's how effective the campaign was. It didn't just ban a plant, it erased trust in ancestral knowledge. It convinced people that their grandparents were ignorant, that tradition was dangerous, that only modern science could protect them. But science isn't neutral. It's funded, it's directed, it's published by institutions with agendas. And when a plant threatens billion-dollar industries, science can be weaponized to eliminate it. That's what happened to comfrey. Not because it was dangerous, because it was too useful, too abundant, too free. Today, you can still find comfrey. Small nurseries sell rootstock, herbalists sell dried leaves, permaculture groups share cuttings. The plant survived because it's resilient, because it refuses to die, because even when pulled from the ground, a fragment of root left behind will regenerate. Comfrey doesn't need us, but we need it. We need plants that heal without patents. We need crops that fertilize without chemicals. We need food systems that regenerate rather than extract. The story of comfrey is the story of every plant we've lost, not because they failed us, because they succeeded too well, because they made us independent, because they proved that abundance doesn't require corporations, that health doesn't require pharmaceuticals, that soil doesn't require synthetic inputs. And that truth, that simple ancient truth, is more dangerous to the system than any weed could ever be. If this video opened your eyes, subscribe to Rooted Way and hit the bell. Every share helps preserve this knowledge. We will reveal the next secret soon, and the plants are still waiting.